Hello and welcome to a Week 13 edition of the Establish the Run Waiver Wire Show. My name is Adam Levitan. As always, joined by the season-long bro you know and love, John Daigle. Daigle, happy Thanksgiving, brother. How's it going?
Very hectic week for everyone at the company and in the industry in particular. The waiver wire, a tad behind on player blurbs, but the entire template's up. The charts are ready to go. I just need to go in and add the thesis behind the quarterbacks, at least for most people. One injury away list cleaned up, ready to go for week 13 as well. So we're moving along.
A Thanksgiving miracle, some would say. Speaking of Thanksgiving, if you are interested in trying our in-season product, we are running a sale right now. Let me pop up this graphic. Yes, I am tech lording to the graphic. EstablishTheRun.com/Black Friday can save up to 65% on access to all our projections, all of our DFS content, all our premium shows, Silva's matchups, and tons more. Everything that goes on in the in-season product is available for sale on a 1 week, 1 month, or rest of season. Again, check out EstablishTheRun.com/Black Friday for details there. All right. I know a lot of you are optimizing for the playoffs right now. I hope and I pray that you listened to last week's show, Wednesday show, where Daigle and I were joined by Mark and Jack, where we discussed in depth for almost an hour ways to optimize your roster for the fantasy football playoffs. That means streaming defenses, streaming quarterbacks, handcuffing at different positions, etc. So this show is going to be more focused on strict waiver wire stuff for stashing for the playoffs. Please listen to that show, and we'll do another preparing for the playoffs show, likely sometime in the next 1 to 2 weeks here. The big story this week, Daigle, happened last night as the injury that I think many people expected for much of the year happened. J.K. Dobbins, who has had such rough injury luck throughout his career, goes down last night. We are recording this on Tuesday around 1 p.m. Eastern, and we have no word on the severity of J.K. Dobbins' injury. Given his history, though, multi-ligament in his knee, Achilles, it doesn't sound or seem great, but we honestly have no idea. So, Daigle, let's start there. How are you thinking about Chargers' backfield off the wire this week?
We have no idea, but the cadence that Laura Rutledge used when it was kicked downfield to her was ominous. The way Troy Aikman and Joe Buck just glossed over the injury and then discussed his injury history seemed a tad scary. And so I am personally preparing for the worst here, pretending as if it may be an extended absence for Dobbins. And if that is the case, I think a lot of waiver wires outside of ours will have Hassan Haskins and Gus Edwards, but I'm skipping the line. Leagues are different this year, and that I know there are a lot of people not just optimizing for the playoffs right now, but the way it's worked with so many injuries and the biocalypse, we still have one more 16 bye week next week, is that even teams with 4 or 5 wins are just 1 or 2 games out of the postseason. There's still a chance they could sneak in before week 15. You got a lot of 10 seeds competing to get into that last slot. And so everyone's fighting for their life and optimizing differently right now based on what they need. And so what you need is going to depend on who you pick up among the Chargers running backs. I go to Kamani Vidal first. We've been down this road before, but we also know Gus Edwards' ceiling, and it's not a great one. And so if we expect Dobbins to miss an extended period of time, yes, Vidal has been healthy scratched the last 3 games. But remember, Hassan Haskins, who's been the backup there, and Gus Edwards, not only have they combined for only 1 catch all season long, that 1 catch was in week 1. They haven't had any since week 2. Neither of them can play the pass catching role at all. Thus, we expect Vidal to be active if Dobbins is out and have a highest ceiling immediately by default. And if that's the case, like he showed us on his one real route for the touchdown, the one time we got to see him with an extended run, that's how he earns a larger role, especially if we're expecting Edwards and Haskins to continue struggling. So I'm skipping the line. I'm going straight to Vidal. I know people will be confused by the suggested fab bid, but it's solely because we don't need to spend lower because, again, no one, and I've looked everywhere, no one's mentioning Vidal as the top option. Everyone's going straight to Edwards and Haskins. So yes, go ahead and spend on Edwards more because that's what you'll need to win him. But I would much rather sneak a lower bid, especially if I'm optimizing for the postseason, and get Vidal instead.
I like that take for sure. I mean, Gus Edwards has been atrocious. Now, we did see Gus Edwards get the goal line carry last night. And the way that Gus Edwards gets there, in my opinion, is just on touchdowns, right? He's not going to be very efficient. I believe he's averaging like 3.3 yards per carry, something totally pathetic this season. He can get there on touchdowns, though, like we saw last night. Totally agree that Vidal is the more exciting upside play, particularly if you get points for receptions here. I think we'll see some kind of timeshare without Vidal. It could even be three without Dobbins. It could even be three backs. Like they could even use Haskins. Also, I will say, if you want to score touchdowns, they do have games coming up against Atlanta is their next game, Tampa in week 15. And then the one that I'm really interested in is Chargers at Patriots in week 17. That is fantasy championship week. So we'll see how it goes. But like starting Edwards or Vidal with no Dobbins against the Patriots in week 17 could actually end up being a pretty strong play. So at this point, I like being reasonably aggressive, I think, on these guys. Daigle has 20 to 40% on Gus Edwards, Vidal, 5 to 15%. Go ahead, Daigle.
5 to 15%, I should say, also in typical 10, 12-man leagues. Once we get to the high stakes chart, I do suggest blowing the load for Vidal because that's the kind of format where running backs are extremely thin. And this is the kind of guy we want to then splurge on.
Okay. The other running back spot this week comes from Washington, where Brian Robinson hurt his ankle early, comes back in the game, can't go, ends up leaving. Austin Eckler also went down in this game. So they have Jerry McNichols. They have Chris Rodriguez. It doesn't strike me that either Robinson or Eckler are going to be out a long time, but I don't know for sure there. Daigle, what's your take on Commanders running back situation?
And because of what you said, the short-term viability, I have McNichols more in line with Amir Abdullah, someone we think will get a spot start, if not two, but that's about it. We're really waiting on word to see how Brian Robinson recovers. This is a Sunday game, whereas the Raiders running backs play on Friday. And since Zamir White and Alexander Madison did not practice at all last week, it does seem like Abdullah is in line for another start. But for McNichols, at least if Robinson's out with that leg injury that looked pretty scary, Eckler can't clear the concussion protocol, then we are expecting to get McNichols as an every touch back. And he hasn't been bad this year, 4.9 yards per carry on his limited run. They have used Chris Rodriguez at times behind him. But again, if we're expecting one back to lead the team in touches, it's definitely going to be McNichols in this spot. Short term, again, a tougher matchup. The Titans haven't allowed any running back to go over 65 yards except Jahmyr Gibbs earlier this year. Beyond that, though, we're talking just about an every touchback that we need to replace for injury. So, yes, McNichols is the next man up.
Yeah, maybe I could be off, but I kind of think Chris Rodriguez would actually play in some type of timeshare with McNichols. Do you think that's a crazy take? I mean, I don't think that they want McNichols out there for 20 touches when they've given Chris Rodriguez. I mean, he closed that. Who was that against? I think it was against like the Giants. I mean, Rodriguez closed that game against the Giants and played pretty well. So I think they have some level of confidence in him. Any more thoughts on Rodriguez?
Rodriguez is noted in deeper leagues as well, just in case we get both of the Commanders running backs out. I would still expect Nichols to lead the team in touches overall. Yeah. But yes, Rodriguez absolutely will mix in.
Okay. The other running back spot is one we already got to look at last week. So he's probably not out there in super deep leagues, but Amir Abdullah can play in the pass game, period. Mm-hmm. I mean, he can catch the football. He actually could have had 2 receiving touchdowns in that game. He did have 1. He can really play in the pass game. So like if you're in a PPR league, it's like a desperation start, Amir Abdullah against the Chiefs. It's not the end of the world. It's pretty bad, but it's not the stone cold end of the world. He might be able to catch you 3 or 4 passes and get you 8 or 9 points here against the Chiefs. I think that would be a baseline expectation. But yeah, any more thoughts on what you saw from Abdullah this week on Sunday, Daigle?
It's the exact run out we called. Predictably, only 8 carries, which are still 61.5% of the team's running back carries. But it's a team that, one, can't run the ball. And then especially when we're talking about the Chiefs, you aren't going to be able to run the ball anyways. It's probably going to be a pass-heavier game script for better or worse against Steve Spagnuolo on Friday. So if that's the case, yes, Abdullah can continue getting there. Now, in the first game when they lost both Zamir and Madison, Abdullah stepped in for 3 catches, 16 yards, and a touchdown, 7.6% target share in that one. The this past week, a 13% target share for 37 yards and a touchdown. So yes, absolutely someone you can flex, especially in PPR.
Okay, just to finish up at running back here, we do have Blake Corum on the list. Hopefully you listened to the Preparing for the Playoff show and you've been tracking the one injury away. You know, Corum only had one carry in that game against the Eagles, but if something were to happen to Kyren, he would be a total turbo smash. Okay, wide receiver this week, we got a Josh Downs injury. Sounds like Josh Downs is going to be out. Now, if Joe Flacco was in there, I'd be like, oh, baby, here we go. Let me get AD Mitchell. I'm happy to start AD Mitchell. With Anthony Richardson in there, it's harder for me to get excited. Daigle has 10 to 20% fab guidance on AD Mitchell here. What do you think about the Downs situation and Mitchell with Anthony Richardson?
We now know that Anthony Richardson at least has multiple outs. A week-to-week shoulder injury for Josh Downs, which is why we're not expecting him to play in this one. And we've already seen this resume for Mitchell without Downs in the first 2 games this year. When he was their slot receiver, 52% route rate from that area of the field, for a 19.5% target share. Not only that, but if you want to talk about his short-term outlook, Patriots run the 3rd most snaps of man coverage. Adonai Mitchell literally leads the league with 43% of his targets against man coverage. So I think it's a pretty good outlook against a bad, terrible Patriots defense, creating pressure at the 19th highest rate in the league as well, lowest, however you want to phrase it. So it's not like the Lions defense. This is closer to what I expect a performance like Richardson had against the Jets, because it's a very bad defense that he's getting. So I don't think the layout is as bad as everyone thinks. But also you get multiple outs because Michael Pittman also came up limp in that game, struggling through both back and shoulder injuries now. So it does seem like, whether they want to or not, when all are at full strength, we've seen they'll gladly move Mitchell back to the bench, use him in a rotational role as their 4th wide receiver. But it does seem like now the path has been made where he can play a lot more down the stretch. So yes, I'm in on finally getting fab for AD Mitchell.
Okay. The other one streamer that I'm interested in for the Thanksgiving slate is Dontavian Wicks. Romeo Doubs sustained a concussion here in this game. And you know the story. Anytime any of the top 3 wide receivers get hurt, it is a big boost to Dontavian Wicks' usage. He has been unable, I guess we could say, to capitalize on some opportunities that he's had this year. He's gotten banged up himself also. We've also had a lot of games lately where Jordan Love just doesn't drop back a ton. I think he has a total of 43 dropbacks in the last 2 weeks for Jordan Love. Now, on Thanksgiving, they are playing the Dolphins at home in the night game. We've seen Tua play awesome lately, and maybe there's some chance that this game could turn into a shootout, in which case I would actually like kind of streaming in Dontavian Wicks here. Daigle, any more thoughts on our old friend, Mr. Wicks?
The Packers wide receivers, all of them are our old friends weekly on this show. And yes, we are willing to do it again if you enjoy 24% and 28% target shares, which I do, because that's what Wicks saw in the only 2 games this year with either one of Christian Watson or Romeo Doubs mistimed. As you mentioned, Doubs out with that concussion on Thursday night. We're already scratching him off the list. Thus, we think Wicks is going to be in 3 wide receiver sets behind Jaden Reed and Christian Watson. And yes, it was a predictable run-heavy game script against the Niners. For as elite talent as the Niners have across the board, Trent Williams is their most important player by far. And the moment he was out, the game script was foreseeable from a mile away. So, of course, they leaned on Josh Jacobs for 19 first-half carries and put it away with him. This one's a little bit different because out of their bye, the Dolphins have been airtight against the run. I think we're going to have no choice but to see more passing from the Packers. And if that's the case, we want all of Watson wherever he's still available and Wicks without Doubs.
Yeah, I like that for sure. You guys are going to call me sick, but I might want to go Wicks over AD Mitchell. But that's just my gut. I'd have to think about that and look at projection. Other wide receivers here on the list, MVS, we've talked about plenty. I think you know what you're getting into with MVS. They're so depleted. He's going to have chances. Will he capitalize on those chances? Is going to be a week-to-week proposition. We also have, God, this guy Nick Westbrook-Ikini, man. Every week I turn around and he has like 3 targets, but one of them is like a 70-yard touchdown. So, yeah, any more thoughts on these dusty wide receivers we've talked about, MVS and NWI?
Do I think NWI, the bad guy himself, will score a touchdown every single week. No. But we are seeing him become Jameson Williams, basically, where he scores outside of the red zone, and he now has a 17.2% target share without DeAndre Hopkins. We've all, in some capacity at the company, talked up Will Levis and Calvin Ridley, especially if you watch that rest of season playoff show. But we also noted those two players for the schedule. Will Levis also playing amazing in 3 games since he came back, 5th in yards per attempt under pressure in that time. And part of the schedule, of course, is the only other ancillary option there among their receivers that is getting targets, and that's Westbrook-Ikine. So, of course, yes, I'm totally fine with him in 12 and 14 team leagues as an explosive player against an easy slate of opponents.
Okay. Last one that we should talk about is Schoonmaker. You know, if you were desperate at tight end, he's probably gone already because this is the same spot as last week, but sounds like Jake Ferguson is going to miss again. Schoonmaker's route rate was only around 58, 59%, but he continues to make plays, man. And like, there's a lot of different ways for Schoonmaker to get there on a weekly basis when Ferguson is out. A, they could say he's earned more playing time, period, and he's going to start playing more. I think that's certainly viable. They used a 2nd-round pick on him in 2023. B, he could just continue this outrageous efficiency. I mean, maybe he can sustain this really high targets per route run. I don't think it's crazy. We've now seen 3 games that Ferguson has missed a majority of. Schoonmaker's been very good in all 3. So it's thin, but I'm okay with it at the tight end position. Daigle, any more thoughts on Schoonmaker?
I don't know if it's necessarily thin, though. I'm more worried about the matchup than I am Schoonmaker's opportunity. It's been a double-digit target share in all 3 games that Jake Ferguson was injured in or unavailable for. He's been a top 12 tight end in all 3 of those games. And the concern here is not the opportunity, but the fact that the Giants are 31st, just 4.1 points per game allowed to opposing tight ends, including shutting down Cade Otton this past week. Now, Cade Otton has some splits we probably need to talk about on another show with Mike Evans. I'm very concerned about Cade Otton rest of season, but it was against a tight Giants defense. I think if you're at this point of the year where you're streaming tight ends, Luke Schoonmaker's opportunity is just too good to pass on. So that's why he's the top pickup at that position.
Yeah, I'm just checking our DVP stuff because it's adjusted, and yeah, it is. We have Giants as the 4th toughest matchup for tight ends. Only Lions, 49ers, and Vikings have been tougher on tight ends. All right. Let's get to some Deke League, guys. Oh, but before we do, Daigle, did I tell you there's a sale going on? If you go to establishtherun.com/Black Friday, you can save up to 65% off of NFL in-season products. Again, head to establishtherun.com/Black Friday for details on our NFL in-season sale.
Is 2 times the quota, or are we getting it once more at the end of the show?
We're going to get at least one more here.
Great.
At least
okay.
one more.
Let's reach our quota.
Let's go to some deep league guys that we haven't talked about. You get guys like David Moore, Marvin Mims, Khalil Herbert here. I think the Khalil Herbert one is interesting. You heard the quote is, I don't want to say viral because it's only going viral amongst fantasy virgins, but the Zach Taylor quote about we need to manage Chase Brown's workload a little bit is going viral in fantasy. And the narrative will be, hey, coming out of the bye, we got to get Khalil Herbert a little bit more work. We're going to kill Chase Brown. I get that. It's still really hard for me to see them taking Chase Brown off the field. That said, if I'm in a deep league, Khalil Herbert might be one injury away from a reasonable role here. Daigle, what do you think about the Bengals running back spot right now?
He remains high on the 1 injury away list. And again, in deeper leagues like this, which is typically 12 and 14 team leagues with deeper benches, he at least is still one of the thinner options out there, which is why I'm a proponent of getting him on your roster ahead of the postseason. We are, I feel like, though, batting over 100 on reported usage bumps this year with running backs. So I don't believe the quote. I saw it like you. I'm not necessarily baking it in. I don't know how much sprinkling of touches Khalil Herbert would actually get out of the bye. But yes, Chase Brown now, literally every single touch without Zach Moss. You would think at least a couple more go to Herbert. But the fact is, with Brown's usage at its current standing, then Herbert will probably get in, maybe even sooner than we expect. So, okay with that. And then Kendry Miller was another deep running back, if only because Darren Rizzi I already talked about. One, he said he didn't understand why Kendry Miller was on injured reserve. That was clearly a Dennis Allen action that happened right before Allen got fired. So we expect to see a little bit of Kendry Miller behind Alvin Kamara. I don't know how much, because Rizzi, like Antonio Pierce, is playing for his job, and they have rattled off back-to-back wins with him as interim head coach. Alvin Kamara, clearly a very important part of that offense, but maybe they get Miller a little more involved. Again, we're talking thin running back waiver wires, so don't mind adding him.
Yeah, the Riz Master General. I love it. Yeah, I mean, if I was coaching for my job, I would have a ton of Kamara also. I get it. But if I was trying to be like, what's best for the franchise, I'd want to see Kendry Miller, and I wouldn't want to kill Alvin Kamara down the stretch. So I get it both ways. The deep league wide receivers here. I know everybody's like, these clips, people are like, oh my God, look at Bryce Young's all 22 films. I mean, these guys are at the full 3.9 for one game in which Bryce Young had some like back foot throws that happened to look awesome. Color me skeptical still on the Bryce Young making a huge leap here stuff. So I'd be real hard pressed to start David Moore in a fantasy playoff game, but I get it if you're in a desperate spot. Also, Marvin Mims in that secondary role behind Vele and Cortland Sutton there for the Broncos. Any thoughts on these guys, Daigle, David Moore, and Marvin Mims?
The Clip Bros have taken it way too far.
It's out of control.
And now this year, I don't know why it's being emphasized, but they're also pointing out offensive penalties and receiving yards getting called back. It's like, yeah, they cheated. Of course he got called back. So it's ridiculous, man. We've lost our minds this year in particular. But as it pertains to David Moore, he does have a rapport with Dave Canales, followed him from Tampa Bay to Carolina. This is the first game without Jalen Coker. We've talked about Jalen Coker. For as much as we like him as a player, he's still an undrafted free agent, can very easily be toppled on the depth chart. And it was also a game where Adam Thielen came back, and it was David Moore popping up with 30% target share and 4 end zone targets. Like, that's in particular is where they used him as almost like a Demarcus Robinson, but with more targets, just a big-bodied red zone guy. And if that's the case, then it's someone we're certainly interested in, especially in this upcoming matchup against the Bucs secondary, which, yes, did stump Tommy DeVito, but prior to that, maybe they did make some changes over their bye. That's typically what happens is teams go in 14 days off and then they adjust what's necessary and they come back and are suddenly good where they were weak prior to that. But the Bucs secondary was one we obviously attacked before then. So still writing them off as of right now. I could envision a spot where both Bryce Young and one Panthers wide receiver gets there this week.
Okay. Anybody else you want to mention here before we move along? Trevor Lawrence is practicing this week to see if he can go with his left shoulder injury. He could be out there on some waivers. If you're looking for quarterback help, I mentioned Chris Rodriguez, Dawson Knox. I haven't heard an update on Dalton Kincaid's injury, but doesn't sound overly serious. Anybody else you want to mention here for the waiver bros?
We will see on Trevor Lawrence. Genuinely not sure how they want to play that, since I'm confused about that entire organization right now. Hassan Haskins, these kind of formats is where I don't mind adding him. I'm not interested in 10-team leagues, despite him being the supposed backup right now. And then I guess the only other deep league options are 1 Tutu Atwell and 3 wide receiver sets. Demarcus Robinson arrested for reportedly driving under the influence, and we have no idea. I believe Sean McVay even said he's not sure yet of any team penalties being handed down. Yeah. So perhaps Tutu Atwell, and what is the total keeps increasing. Both team totals against the Saints for this upcoming week could be an interesting spot. And then Sincere McCormick, if we want to get really desperate on thin waivers, he is the last man standing for the Raiders behind Amir Abdullah, since Dylan Laube, who everyone was excited about during best ball season, was active this past week for the first time since week 6, but 0 offensive touches, just 1 big kickoff return. So it seems like if Abdullah was injured on Friday and the rest remain out, then someone named Sincere McCormick will then take over running back touches for the Raiders.
All right. Let's get to some of the questions from the people. Appreciate the questions as always. Yater FinFan says, would you prioritize Vidal over Edwards? We already talked about that. But an interesting question is Vidal or Corum. Who would you rather hold here, Daigle? Obviously, this is somewhat team dependent. If you need someone soon, it's probably Vidal. If you don't need someone soon, maybe it's Corum. But what do you think about this question, Daigle?
If it's a stash strictly for the playoffs, it is Blake Corum, who I went ahead and moved to number 1 overall in our 1 injury away list, I believe. I bumped Jordan Mason down, given the systematic failures of the 49ers right now, and we're just not sure about how long their injuries are going to linger. I would still prefer Corum, and Corum's not just on here just because he's an amazing stash, like a Trey Benson, for example. Remember, Kyren Williams fumbled in that game twice on Sunday night. It probably leads to nothing, since Corum still only got 1 touch behind him, but maybe Corum comes out with a handful of more touches. So something to just be ahead of.
Iggy says, can you give top 5 playoff defenses? So I'll say this, Iggy, you could take advantage of the sale. You could just try a 1-week pass. And if you do that, then you could come up here to NFL. You come down here to, where are we? I'm sorry, you go to Draft Kit, and then you go to defense versus position rankings. You tech lord your way over to that. You come down here to defense versus position strength of schedule, and you can sort this, each position, by fantasy playoff weeks only, and see what we think who has the best schedules in the fantasy playoffs, including for defense. So that's one reason. Yeah, one of many reasons, honestly, Daigle. To take
and if you take advantage of the quota sale, then remember, next week when you log on, you will also see that we are starting a new article. I will be flipping open a streaming article specifically for the playoffs, where I will have everything listed with context specifically for weeks 15 on for everyone.
Yes. The rest of season 150 is show and rankings are sadly coming to an end next week, as there is no more trading, of course, in fantasy leagues, but certainly excited for everybody who's in the playoffs and looking for Daigle's comments on stashes there. All right. Let me tech lord back to the questions here.
Just leave it up.
Fantasy Burner says, injuries at wide receiver are brutal. Do you like Devon Vele as a playoff wide receiver 3? Targets have been good the last few weeks. Yeah. I feel like we've been under projecting Vele a little bit. His routes, his underlying stuff wasn't great, but dude's been balling. I understand that a lot of it is short area stuff, and we can't expect Bo Nix to sustain this in tougher matchups, but I think it's not like the worst idea in the world. Any thoughts on Vele, Daigle?
Target share has increased in 4 consecutive games now, including 23% this past week. He did battle a little bit of injury at the beginning of the year, so maybe that's why it's coming on slowly and stronger, but he is standing out as a high floor option for sure. If you need to pad, I still question his ceiling. Also, as they continue to get more and more players involved, Marvin Mims continues to get touches and also utilized in a very explosive way as well. So yeah, I mean, it's an offense with a very easy schedule.
Yeah. Okay. Windsurfer says, assuming they're still available, what is your opinion for Cam Akers versus Jalen Warren? Akers has a better schedule, but falling utilization. Warren has more carries, but a tougher schedule. I thought Jalen Warren played a really good game in that snow game on Thursday night. He continues to play well in the pass game. It would be really hard pressed for me to carry Akers over Jalen Warren. I can play Jalen Warren in a desperation spot if I have to. And if Najee were to go down, I really like Jalen Warren. So I think it's pretty easily Warren over Akers for me. Daigle, what do you think there?
We've got a couple questions about Jalen Warren because I don't even have him in the 1 injury away list because he's not 1 injury away. Like, he's getting 15 touches per week. Like, what more do you want except for Najee Harris to perhaps get out of the way and give him more touches? The way Warren wins is, in my opinion, not susceptible to the defense. I think he's just a good player who gets the pass catching role over Najee as well. So yes, I would definitely want Warren over Akers. And as you said, he's flexible every week, honestly.
Okay. Last question is from MLB PMAU. He says, should I stick with Kyler Murray rest of season, or should I go streaming with Anthony Richardson and Matthew Stafford? I get it, man. Kyler's been so streaky, and I was really high on Kyler before the season. He's had a couple good games. He's been streaky, as honestly, this entire Arizona offense has been streaky for much of the year. What do you think here, Daigle? Prefer riding with Kyler or stream it in with these 3 guys in matchups?
If you do have some combination, he's mentioning Richard and Stafford right here, like having some combination of the last round guys, Drake May, Bo Nix, Sam Darnold, that's just the nuts for super flex leagues, honestly, because it allowed you to get everywhere else. I don't mind streaming. if anyone here's the issue. If anyone tells you they know what's going to happen with the Cardinals, they don't. This is the hardest team to project week to week. Every time it seems like we have a signal for this offense, then suddenly the rug gets pulled out from under us. So I don't know. I genuinely have no idea about Kyler and the Cardinals offense. The rushing floor still helps. And when we talk about streaming rest of the season, I think of it as a week to week game.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's tough. I think I would rather stream.
The Anthony Richardson gets the Patriots this week, the Giants in fantasy championship week. Those are the two spots where I'd like to use Richardson there. And I think you can get by with Richardson and Stafford. And maybe you drop Kyler and no one picks him up. And maybe you can stream Kyler in a good spot too. So yeah, I like the idea of streaming based on matchup for sure. All right. We've said it all about waivers ahead of week 13. If you're still grinding waivers, shout out to you. Keep grinding through the playoffs. Go ahead and get that title. You know how you can help get the title, Daigle? And if you're out of it,
I have an idea.
And if you're out of it, you can play some DFS. God's game. In order to do that, you need to check out the Black Friday sale at establishtheRun.com/Black Friday. Save up to 65% off on the NFL in-season product for this week only.
If you do this, you'll also get to jump into the Discord chats with myself 3 times a week, which I will be going live on Tuesday and Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern. And then we may add some more during the playoffs at the end of the year. We'll see.
Daigle's a real man of the people. If you want to have Daigle answer your personal question, the Black Friday sale is indeed for you. Just need to tech lord your way after you get signed up into the Discord. All right. That is going to do it for a week 13 edition of the Established to Run Waiver Wire show. We'll be back with Silva later tonight for Team by Team. Also, if you haven't checked out any of our DFS shows, we are turning 2 of them free this week. Establish the Million on YouTube, Tuesday, 9 p.m. Establish the Show on YouTube. Myself, Silva, Wiggins, Wednesday, 3 p.m. We'll be talking all angles of Thursday's DFS Thanksgiving slate. For Daigle. For everyone behind the scenes at ETR, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.